The insane execution of Nazi Commandant Rudolf Hoess. The Holocaust was one of the worst periods in human history, during which millions of innocent people were cruelly slaughtered. While more of us are aware of the awful events that occurred in concentration camps such as Auschwitz, few are mindful of the narrative of Rudolf Hoess, the notorious commander of the Auschwitz concentration camp. We'll discuss about the crazy execution of the Nazi commander Rudolf Hoess in this video. So without further ado, let's get straight into this. Rudolf Franz Ferdinand Hoess was a Nazi SS officer who was convicted of war crimes after Nazi Germany was defeated. Hoess was the commandant of Auschwitz concentration and death camp. For the longest time, he tested and executed methods to hasten Hitler's command, known as the Final Solution, to methodically murder the Jewish population of Nazi-occupied Europe. Hoess was born into a devout Catholic household in Baden-Baden. His mother, Lena, and father, Franz Xaver Hoess, raised him. Hoess was the lone son and eldest of 3 children. On December 11, 1901, he was christened Rudolf Franz Ferdinand. When he started primary school, he was a lonely youngster with no peers his own age. All of his interactions were with adults. In his memoirs, he was temporarily taken by Romanis. His father, a former army officer who fought in German East Africa, owned and operated a tea and coffee shop. When World War I broke out, Hoess served briefly in a military hospital before being sent to his father's and grandfather's old unit, the German Army 21st Regiment of Dragoons. At the age of 14, he joined the Ottoman 6th Army at age 15 and fought in Baghdad, Kut el Amara, and Palestine. Hoess was present at the correct time and location to observe the Armenian genocide, which he does not mention in his memoirs. He received the Iron Crescent, the Iron Cross, first and second class, and other awards despite being wounded 3 times and suffering from malaria. Hoess also led a cavalry battalion for a short time. When word of a ceasefire reached Damascus, where he was at the time, he and a few others opted to ride all the way back home, rather than wait for Allied forces to take them as prisoners of war. This required crossing enemy territory in Romania, but they finally returned to Bavaria. Following the armistice on November 11, 1918, Hoess completed his secondary education and quickly joined some of the newly formed nationalist parliamentary groups, first the East Prussian Volunteers Corps, and subsequently the Free Corps Rossbach in the Baltic, Silesia, and the Ruhr. During the Silesian uprising against the Germans, Hoess participated in violent terror attacks against Poles and on French nationals during the French occupation of the Ruhr. In 1922, after seeing Adolf Hitler speak in Munich, he joined the Nazi Party and rejected his Catholic faith. Hoess and members of the Free Corps assaulted and killed local school teacher Walther Cadeau on the orders of farm supervisor Martin Bormann, who subsequently became Hitler's private secretary. On May 13, 1923, in Mecklenburg, the French occupation authorities were reported to have been informed by Cadeau that the Free Corps parliamentary soldier Albert Leo Schlageter was carrying out sabotage operations against the French supply line. Schlageter was apprehended and killed on May 26, 1923. Shortly after, Hoess and several accomplices, including Bormann, exacted their vengeance on Cadeau. On April 1, 1934, Hoess joined the SS in response to Himmler's effective call to arms, and the following year was assigned to the Death's Head units. He grew to revere Himmler to the point that he regarded whatever he said to be gospel and wanted to show his portrait in his office rather than Hitler's. In December 1934, Hoess was transferred to the Dachau concentration camp, where he served as block commander. In Dachau, he was mentored by then SS Brigadier General Theodor Eicke and appointed adjunct to Hermann Baranowski at Sachsenhausen. He was functioning as administrator of inmates' property towards the end of his stint of duty there. On January 18, 1940, as chief of the Sachsenhausen Preventative Custody Camp, Hoess ordered all detainees not assigned to work duties to stand outside in negative 26 Celsius temperatures. The majority of the convicts wore no jackets or gloves, and some of the frozen inmates were taken to the infirmary by block elders. Hoess ordered the doors to be locked. 78 convicts perished during the day, and another 67 died that night. Hoess was sent to assess the viability of creating a concentration camp in western Poland, which Germany had annexed into the province of Upper Silesia. His good evaluation resulted in the establishment of Auschwitz. and his appointment as commandant. The camp was erected around an existing Austro-Hungarian army barracks at Auschwitz and was known as Auschwitz in German. Hoess oversaw the camp for 3.5 years, transforming it from a small facility into the huge Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. According to Hoess's trial, he was summoned to Berlin in June 1941 for a meeting with Himmler to get personal directives. Himmler informed Hoess that Hitler had authorized the final solution. Himmler chose Auschwitz to slaughter Europe's Jews because of its easy access by train, and also because the wide location afforded space for assuring isolation, according to Hoess. Himmler referred to the idea as a secret Reich affair and instructed Hoess not to discuss it with SS Gruppenführer Richard Glücks, the leader of the Nazi camp system managed by the Death's Head section. On September 3, 1941, Hoess began testing and honing mass murder tactics. His research resulted in Auschwitz being the most efficient murdering tool of the final solution and the Holocaust's most powerful emblem. During normal camp operations, 2 or 3 trains carried 2,000 inmates. Each would arrive daily for 4 to 6 weeks, according to Hoess. The detainees were unloaded at Birkenau and subjected to selection, which was normally performed by a member of the SS medical staff. In 1942, Hoess had a romance with an Auschwitz inmate, Eleanor Hoess, a political prisoner. The woman became pregnant while being held in a standing-only jail cell. After being released from custody, she underwent an abortion at a camp hospital in 1943, narrowly avoiding being picked for execution, according to her subsequent account. The issue may have resulted in Hoess's recall from the leadership of Auschwitz in 1943. In 1944, SS Judge George Conrad Morgan and his aide, Wybeck, examined the matter, interrogated Hoess, and planned to charge Hoess, but the case was dropped. After the war, Morgan, Wybeck, and Hoess testified. Hoess returned to Auschwitz on May 8, 1944 to oversee Operation Hoess, in which 430,000 Hungarian Jews were transferred to the camp and murdered in 56 days. Even Hoess's expanded facility couldn't manage the massive amounts of victims' corpses, and the camp employees were forced to burn thousands of remains in open pits. Around 10,000 Jews were gassed every day in May and June alone. Because the capacity of the gas chambers and crematoria were surpassed, mass pit executions were built. Jews were forced to be stripped before being brought by the Sonderkommando to an underground fire pit, where they were shot by the SS and thrown into the flames. Hoess's ultimate assignment was to the Ravensbrück detention camp. In November 1944, he relocated there with his family, who resided nearby. With the installation of the gas chamber, Hoess oversaw the killing by gassing operations, which resulted in the deaths of almost 2,000 female captives. Himmler instructed Hoess in the last days of the war to disguise himself as a member of the Kriegsmarine. Hoess avoided arrest for over a year by using the alias Franz Lang and worked as a gardener in Gottrupel, Schleswig-Holstein. Hans Alexander, a German Jew who fled to London in 1936 and became a Nazi hunter for the British government's #1 war crimes investigation unit, discovered Hoess's whereabouts in 1946. Alexander, a captain in the Royal Pioneer Corps at the time, traveled to Hoess's house with a group of British troops, many of whom were also Jewish. Hoess declared in his declaration filed before Nuremberg on April 5, 1946, "I controlled Auschwitz until December 1, 1943, and I believe that at least 2,500,000 people were killed and slaughtered there by gassing and burning, with another 500,000 dying of famine and illness, for a total of around 3 million dead." This statistic reflects around 70 or 80% of all inmates brought to Auschwitz, with the remaining chosen and utilized as slave labor in the concentration camp factories. When accused of murdering 3.5 million people, Hoess said, "No, just 2.5 million survived. The rest died of illness and malnutrition." He was turned up to Polish authorities on May 25, 1946. And the Supreme National Tribunal in Poland prosecuted him for murder. His trial ran from March 11th to March 29th of 1947. On April 2nd, 1947, Hoess was condemned to death by hanging. On April 16th, the punishment was carried out near to the cremation of the old Auschwitz I concentration camp. He was hung on a short drop gallows built mainly near the camp's Gestapo. Thank you for taking the time to watch. If you'd like us to make more videos like this, please subscribe to the channel and leave your video suggestions in the comments section.